In the spring of 2023, farmers in California's San Joaquin Valley watched their fields disappear beneath water, not from drought, not from a broken dam, from a lake that had not existed for 70 years, a lake that human engineering had spent 80 years and billions of dollars systematically erasing, a lake that came back anyway, as if the 70 years of absence had simply not happened. This was Tulare Lake. And its return is one of the most powerful stories of what happens when human ambition tries to permanently override the logic of geography. At its natural maximum, Tulare Lake covered approximately 2,000 square kilometers in the southern San Joaquin Valley, larger than Lake Tahoe, roughly 160 kilometers long, 50 kilometers wide, with an average depth of only 4 to 6 meters, but a surface area that made it the largest freshwater lake west of the Mississippi River. It had existed in this valley for at least 10,000 years before European contact, fed every spring by snowmelt cascading down from the Sierra Nevada mountains to the east. The lake sat in what geologists call a closed basin, a structural depression in the Earth's crust with no natural outlet to the sea. Every spring, the Kings, Tule, and Kauai rivers swelled with snowmelt and flowed west across the valley floor to the lowest point. The water had nowhere to drain. It simply accumulated year after year, building a lake of extraordinary ecological richness. The Tule reed marshes along the shoreline stretched for kilometers in every direction. These dense wetlands supported populations of migratory waterfowl, so enormous that historical accounts describe flocks darkening the sky for hours. Millions of ducks, geese, and pelicans stopped at Tulare Lake each year on the Pacific Flyway, the Great Migration Corridor running along the western coast of the Americas. The lake teemed with fish. Otters, elk, and grizzly bears depended on it. By any ecological measure, Tulare Lake was one of the most productive freshwater ecosystems in North America. The Yaquits people and other indigenous groups had lived around Tulare Lake for at least 10,000 years. They built entire cultures around its seasonal rhythms, fishing its waters, harvesting its reeds for basket making, and hunting the animals that gathered at its shores. At their peak, perhaps 50 to 70,000 people inhabited the San Joaquin Valley, their civilization inseparable from the lake that sustained it. Then came 1849. Gold was discovered in the Sierra Nevada foothills, and within 2 years, hundreds of thousands of settlers had poured into California. The Central Valley's flat, fertile land looked like an agricultural paradise to people who had farmed much harder ground back east. The stage was set for one of the most dramatic landscape transformations in American history. The destruction of Tulare Lake was not a single event. It was a systematic campaign that took approximately 80 years, driven by economics, political power, and the 19th century belief that wetlands were wasted land waiting to be made productive. It began with small irrigation ditches in the 1850s, diverting water from the rivers that fed the lake. Each diversion was small. Each one was logical from the perspective of the individual farmer who built it. Together, they began starving the lake of its water supply. The arrival of the Transcontinental Railroad in 1869 changed the scale entirely. Suddenly, Central Valley produce could reach markets across the entire country. The economic incentive to convert every hectare of former lake bed to farmland became overwhelming. Wheat, then cotton, then alfalfa. Drainage projects to expose the lake bed. By the 1920s, the lake was a shadow of itself, existing only in exceptionally wet years when the rivers ran too high for the diversions to fully capture. Then came the dams. Pine Flat Dam on the Kings River, completed in 1954, was the killing blow. It captured the lake's primary water source behind a wall of concrete, releasing water on controlled schedules for irrigation, rather than allowing it to flow naturally to the valley floor. Other dams followed on every major tributary. By the 1970s, Tulare Lake had effectively ceased to exist. The ancient lake bed became cotton fields, dairy operations, almond orchards, and tomato farms, producing billions of dollars in food every year. The Yaquits people lost their homeland completely. Waterfowl populations in the region declined by over 90%, and the valley began to sink. because farmers now pumped groundwater to replace the surface water captured by dams, and removing water from underground aquifers causes the land above to collapse. Parts of the San Joaquin Valley have sunk nearly 9 meters since the 1920s, some of the most dramatic land subsidence ever recorded anywhere on Earth. Then came the winter from 2022 to 2023. Atmospheric river storms swept into California one after another throughout the winter months, each one dumping extraordinary quantities of rain and snow. The Sierra Nevada accumulated a snowpack not seen in decades. Some locations measured over 6 meters of snow depth. When spring arrived and temperatures climbed, all of that snow began melting simultaneously. The rivers exploded. The dams released water at maximum safe capacity, and they were still overwhelmed. The water did what water has always done in this valley. It flowed downhill to the lowest point. It flowed to where Tulare Lake had always been. By May 2023, over 200 square kilometers of farmland had disappeared beneath water. Roads were submerged. Farm equipment sat rusting in the middle of a new lake. Satellite images showed the water expanding day by day as more snowmelt arrived from the mountains. The economic damage reached nearly $280 million. Crops were destroyed. Dairy herds were evacuated. Communities were cut off for weeks. And within days of the water's return, wildlife arrived. Water birds descended by the thousands. Fish appeared, carried in with the floodwaters. Scientists documented dozens of species using the temporary wetland that had not been seen in this region for generations. The ghost of the old ecosystem flickered back to life, as if it had simply been waiting beneath the farmland for someone to let it breathe again. The water receded by late 2023. The farmers assessed the damage. The insurance claims were filed, and scientists pointed out the obvious. The basin is still there. The rivers still flow from the Sierra Nevada. Climate projections show more extreme wet years ahead. Tulare Lake will return. The only question is whether next time we will be ready. Empires rise on paper, and sometimes on the lake beds that were never really gone.